The wind on Thesacromen 4 smelled like burnt copper and ammonia, and it never stopped. It came screaming off the alkaline flats at 40 knots, scouring the prefab walls of Forward Station Den, with a fine grit that settled into everything: bootlaces, rifle actions, the folds of Kova's ears. Staff Sergeant Cole Decker brushed the dust from his dog's muzzle for the third time that hour and watched the perimeter lights flicker against a sky the color of old rust. Kova sneezed, shook her head once, then pressed her shoulder back against his thigh. She was a Belgian Malinois, 58 pounds of tawny fur and quiet attention, and she had been with Decker since the handler course at Fort Edril 6 years ago, before Thesak, before the Vethani border conflict, before the coalition had decided that a Class 12 Deathworld's forward observation post was a fine place to park a K-9 unit nobody had asked for. She had been the runt of a working line bred for military detection, not the flashy Malinois the Spec Ops teams favored, but the narrow-headed, wire-thin variant that the detection school called nose dogs, because that's all they were. A nose attached to a body that existed to carry the nose into bad places. She had washed 2 handlers before Decker. Not because she was difficult, but because she required a willingness to let her work at her own speed, to trust the sit, to understand that when she stopped moving, the smartest thing a human could do was stop moving too. Decker had that patience. He had learned it through 2 deployments where the dogs that worked fast got results and the dogs that worked slow stayed alive. Kova was a slow dog. She was also the most accurate detection animal he had ever worked with, and after 6 years together he trusted her nose the way a pilot trusted his instruments. Completely, without reservation, even when everything he could see and hear was telling him something different. The Vethani liaison officer, a 7-foot crustacean named Proctor Rate Shen, had looked at Kova on the first day and asked, through the translator, whether the animal was a ration supplement or a recreational object. Decker had said neither. He had considered explaining what a Belgian Malinois was, what detection dogs did, how 15,000 years of selective breeding had produced an animal whose olfactory system was the most sophisticated chemical analysis tool in the known galaxy. He had decided against it. The explanation would have required more words than Shen appeared willing to listen to. And Kova, who was at that moment sniffing the Vethani's ankle plate with polite professional interest, was already forming her own assessment. Shen had not asked again, but the look he gave the dog, 2 stalked eyes swiveling down with something between pity and contempt, had not changed in 11 weeks. The station held 43 personnel. 31 were Vethani Marines in articulated shell plate. 8 were Coalition technical advisors, 4 Keshari archivists who breathed through membrane filters, 2 Den lore engineers who communicated through bioluminescent patterns on their forearms, and 2 Pelic translators who looked like upright salamanders and flinched at sudden noises. All 8 of them flinched when Kova walked past. 2 were Human, Decker, and Corporal Ansari, a combat medic who had stopped asking why the K-9 unit was assigned here and started keeping jerky in her cargo pocket for the dog. And Kova was the 43rd. She was listed on the manifest as Auxiliary Unit K-94, Equipment Class, Biological. Decker had never corrected the designation. It kept the paperwork simple, and the Vethani didn't look too hard at equipment. The alkaline flats ran in every direction for 90 kilometers before hitting the ridgeline where the Vreth Compact had been massing armor for 3 weeks. Coalition intelligence said they wouldn't move until the wet season, which was still 40 days out. Coalition intelligence had also said Thesacromen 4 atmosphere was non-irritating to canines. Kova sneezed again. Decker scratched the base of her skull, where the fur was thickest, and watched Shen's patrol come in through the eastern gate. They moved in a tight column, 12-foot frames hunched against the wind, chitinous legs crunching through the mineral crust. Shen was in front, as always. His mandibles were working, which meant he was talking to someone on the command net, and his dorsal plates had gone from dull blue to a mottled gray-green. That was stress coloring. Decker had learned to read it in the first week. Blue was baseline, gray-green was concern, dark gray was anger, flat gray was defeat. He had not yet seen the others and did not know their vocabulary, but he paid attention because the translator was good with words and terrible with feelings. Shen stopped at the gate, turned one stalk eye toward Decker and Kova sitting on the supply crate by the west wall, and made a gesture with his secondary arms that Decker had come to understand as something between a dismissal and a warning. Sergeant Decker, the translator clipped every consonant. The perimeter sensors have recorded subsurface movement, possibly burrowing ordnance, possibly fauna. The commander wants a sweep of Grid 7 before dark. Grid 7 is 3 clicks into the flats, Decker said. Yes. You want my dog to sweep 3 clicks of open ground for burrowing ordnance. Shen's mandibles stopped working, both stalk eyes fixed on him. I want the animal to justify its presence on the manifest. The commander has questioned why Coalition Command assigned a... He paused, and Decker could hear the translator searching, a pet to a forward combat station. Decker looked at Kova. She was sitting with her chin on his knee watching Shen with soft, steady brown eyes. Her ears were forward. Her tail was still. She's not a pet, Decker said. She's a detection asset. Then detect. The sweep took 90 minutes. Kova worked the grid in methodical arcs, nose down, moving through the copper-scented dust at a steady trot. Her gait was economical, no wasted energy, no playful deviations, just the disciplined quartering pattern that 6 years of training had written into her muscles. Decker followed 10 meters behind with a handheld ground scanner that told him less than nothing. The mineral content in the soil scrambled every reading. The scanner was Coalition tech, built for the silicon substrate worlds the Vethani preferred. It was not built for Thesak. Kova was built for Earth, which was worse. But she worked the grid anyway. At the 40-minute mark, she stopped, sat, and looked back at Decker. He walked up, knelt beside her, and looked at the ground. There was nothing visible. The alkaline crust was unbroken. "Show me," he said quietly. Kova pressed her nose to a spot 3 inches to the left of where she'd been pointing, held it for 2 seconds, then sat back and looked at him again. Calm, certain. Decker pulled the probe from his vest, pushed it into the crust, and felt it hit something metallic at 14 centimeters. He dug carefully until the object emerged. It was cylindrical, segmented, and warm to the touch, about the length of his forearm, with a casing that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent pattern he didn't recognize. It was a Vreth compact subsurface penetrator, a burrowing anti-personnel mine designed to work its way upward through soft ground over a period of days, emerging on a pressure trigger. Coalition intelligence had classified these as theoretical. They had not been deployed in any previous engagement. The casing's warmth meant it was still active, still climbing. Kova had found it by smell. Decker marked the location, backed off 20 meters, and keyed his comm. Station Den, this is K94, Grid 7, Sector 4. Confirmed subsurface penetrator, Vreth manufacture. Active. I need an EOD team and a wider sweep radius. The line was quiet for 8 seconds. Then Shen's voice through the translator. Repeat. You are confirming Vreth ordnance. Confirmed. My dog found it. Another pause. Your dog. My dog. The EOD team found 11 more penetrators in Grid 7 over the next 4 hours. The sweep expanded to Grid 6 and 8 and found another 23. Each one was warm, active, burrowing upward. The Vreth compact had been seeding the approach to Station Den for at least 2 weeks, and not a single piece of Coalition sensor equipment had registered them. The chief EOD technician, a Vethani sapper named Telk, ran a full spectral analysis on the penetrator casings. The chemical signature was so faint that the coalition's standard detection arrays would have needed to be recalibrated by a factor of 12 to pick it up. Kova had been picking it up at 14 centimeters through mineral-dense soil in 40-knot wind. Telk asked Decker how. Decker told him about the olfactory receptor count in a Belgian Malinois, roughly 300 million, compared to 6 million in the average human. He told him about the vomeronasal organ, the split airflow architecture, the way a trained detection dog could isolate a single chemical signature from 10,000 competing scents, the way a musician could pick a single instrument out of an orchestra. Telk listened to all of it and then asked Decker to repeat the number. 300 million, Decker said. Telk went quiet for a long time. Then he asked how many olfactory receptors a Vithani had. Decker didn't know, Telk did. The answer was 800. Shen walked over. He stood in front of Decker for a long time, both stalks angled down at the dog. The animal detected explosive compounds through 14 centimeters of mineral crust, he said. She's trained for it. Our sensors did not. Decker said nothing. Shen's coloring shifted gray-green to a dark, even blue. Decker had never seen that particular shade. He filed it away and waited. Your species keeps detection assets in its living quarters, Shen said. It sleeps beside them. It feeds them from its own plate. I feed her from her own plate. She has a bowl. You have a bowl for the detection asset. Yes. Shen's mandibles worked for 3 seconds without producing sound. Then he turned and walked back to the command post. That night, Decker found a second sleep pad outside his quarters, positioned 6 inches from the wall where Kova usually curled up. It was Vithani issue, too large, made of a dense fibrous material that smelled like seawater. Decker checked the corridor cameras. The footage showed Sapper Telk carrying the pad at 0300, placing it carefully against the wall, and standing over it for 11 seconds before walking away. Kova inspected it, circled it twice, and settled onto it with a sigh that said she had been waiting for someone to figure this out. Decker noticed that Kova, who had spent the first weeks at Station Den sleeping with one ear cocked toward the door, alert, never fully settled, aware on some level that this place was not safe, now slept flat on her side with her legs extended, the way she slept at home, at Edril, in the places where she trusted the perimeter. She had decided, in whatever way dogs decided these things, that Station Den was hers. Over the next 5 days, things changed at Station Den in ways that no directive or order would have produced. The Keshari archivists stopped flinching when Kova walked past the data center. One of them, a thin-limbed creature named Sevi, began leaving a small cup of filtered water outside the data center door each morning. Kova drank from it once, decided she preferred Decker's canteen, and left it alone. Sevi continued leaving the cup. The Den lore engineers modified Kova's harness without asking, reinforced the stitching with a bonding compound that made the nylon straps functionally indestructible, and added a small bioluminescent patch to the chest plate that pulsed in sync with Kova's heartbeat. Decker asked why. So we know it is alive in the dark, one of them said, in a tone that suggested this was obvious. The Pellic translators compiled a list of Kova's behavioral signals and distributed it as a field reference document titled Behavioral Communication Matrix, Earth Detection Asset K94, Kova. It was 6 pages long and more accurate than anything the K9 school had ever produced. The manifest was updated quietly from equipment class, biological to auxiliary personnel, detection specialist. The change appeared in the system without a timestamp or an author. On the 8th day after the mine sweep, Kova earned her keep a second time. Decker was eating lunch in the mess when Kova, lying under the table with her chin on his boot, lifted her head. Her ears went forward. Her nostrils flared. She stood up, walked out from under the table, and sat down facing the ventilation intake on the far wall. Decker put his fork down. She didn't look at him. She was locked on the vent. The sit again, but not the ordnance sit. This was a variation Decker had seen only in chemical detection training. Head slightly elevated, nostrils working in rapid short bursts instead of the long slow draws she used for buried explosives. He keyed the comm. Engineering, K94. My dog is alerting on ventilation intake 7 in the mess. She's giving me a chemical detection posture. Can you run an atmospheric analysis on that line? The Denlore engineer who answered, Freck, took 14 seconds to respond. His bioluminescent patterns were flickering fast enough that the comm's visual pickup could barely track them. Sergeant Decker, the atmospheric analysis shows trace concentrations of diethylketamine sulfate in the ventilation line feeding intake 7. The compound is a Vreth neurological agent, odorless and colorless to all known coalition species. In Vethani physiology, it causes progressive motor paralysis beginning with the mandibles. Shut the vent. Freck shut the vent. The analysis showed that the Vreth had been introducing the agent into Station Den's ventilation system through a subsurface line that ran from beyond the perimeter to the station's environmental plant. At the current concentration, the first symptoms would have appeared within 72 hours. By then, the agent would have been in the garrison systems too long to counteract. It was a slow kill, the kind of weapon a patient species used when it wanted a garrison standing, but unable to fight when the armor column finally advanced. Shen stood over the sealed injection point for a long time. Then he walked to the mess, where Kova was eating the chicken and rice ration that Decker had portioned into her bowl, and stood over her for an even longer time. The animal detected a compound that is undetectable to every species in the Coalition registry, he said. She detected something that didn't belong in the air. Our atmospheric sensors did not register the compound. Her nose is better than your atmospheric sensors. Shen's coloring went through 3 shifts in 5 seconds. The last one settled on the deep blue that Decker had started to recognize as something more complex than he first thought. How long, Shen said, has your species been keeping these animals? Decker thought about it. 15,000 years, give or take. Shen's mandibles stopped. His stalks went perfectly still. 15,000 years, the translator repeated. That's when we started breeding wolves into dogs. The detection training is more recent, couple 100 years. Shen said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the mess with the stride of a being who had just been given a piece of information that required significant reevaluation of his existing assumptions. The Vreth Compact moved 37 days ahead of schedule. It happened on a morning that smelled the same as every other morning on Thesacroman 4. Decker was running Kova through a maintenance search of the west wall perimeter when the first kinetic round hit the station's north tower. The tower came apart, a lateral disintegration that turned reinforced composite into a spray of fragments moving at 500 meters per second. The sound reached Decker a half-second later, a flat percussive crack that he felt in his sternum before he heard it in his ears. Kova dropped flat. She didn't flinch, didn't bolt, didn't vocalize. She went prone and pressed herself against the base of the wall, ears pinned, and looked up at Decker with eyes that were steady and focused and waiting. He was already down, one hand on her harness, the other reaching for his comm. The second round hit the motor pool, throwing a column of oily smoke into the copper sky. The third took out the antenna array. The fourth punched through the east barracks. The fifth hit the water purification unit. 5 impacts in 12 seconds. This was a coordinated barrage from a force that knew exactly where every critical system was located. The comm returned static. The antenna was gone. Decker pulled Kova to him and ran toward the southern bunker. He heard the Vethani Marines before he saw them, the heavy clatter of shellplate moving at combat speed, mandible clicks the translator couldn't parse. They were falling back from the north wall. dragging wounded. Shen was at the rear, firing a crew-served weapon from the hip that would have taken 3 humans to carry, his dorsal plates the darkest gray-green Decker had ever seen. Decker ducked into the southern bunker and found Corporal Ansari already there, her medkit open, her hands bloody to the wrists. She had 3 Vethani wounded on the floor, one missing a leg below the second joint, one with a penetrating wound through the thorax, and one clicking rapidly in a pain response. They came out of the ridgeline, Ansari said without looking up. Full armor column, infantry screen. Intelligence said 40 days. Intelligence was wrong. Intelligence is always wrong. That's why they call it intelligence. She knotted a tourniquet with a competence that made the motion look gentle. What's the dog's status? Decker looked at Kova. She was sitting beside the bunker entrance, facing the door, ears forward, utterly still, calm, focused, as though the explosions shaking the walls were a mild inconvenience she was choosing to tolerate. She's fine. Good. I'm going to need her to stay fine. The Vreth Compact didn't want to destroy Station Den. They wanted to take it. Their armor column stopped at 800 meters while their infantry, tall, narrow-bodied creatures in segmented suits that made them look like armored centipedes, moved up through the seeded ground. Their own ordnance didn't trigger on them. They'd coded the penetrators to their biosignature. They walked through the minefield they'd planted like it was a garden path. Shen pulled his Marines into the command bunker complex and established a perimeter that shrank every 20 minutes. First, they lost the north wall, then the east barracks, then the motor pool, then the west wall, section by section. As the Vreth infantry probed and pushed and probed again with the patient persistence of a species that had been fighting border wars for longer than humanity had been in space. The Vethani fought with a cold, methodical precision that Decker respected. They were not panicking, they were not breaking, they were falling back by doctrine through prepared positions. But each position held for a shorter time than the last. By noon, the perimeter was the command bunker, the southern bunker, and 60 meters of trenchwork between them. 16 of Shen's 31 Marines were down, 4 dead, 12 wounded, 2 of the wounded critical. Ansari was on her 4th tourniquet, improvising with a human painkiller at 1/16th dosage, which was either going to reduce the wounded Marines' pain or put them to sleep for a week. Decker had moved to the trenchwork with Kova. In the trench, she could do what she was built for. She found the first infiltrator at 13 meters. The Vreth infantry had been tunneling. Their segmented suits allowed them to move through the loose alkaline substrate like worms through wet soil, surfacing behind the defensive line. No sensor picked them up. No sentry saw them. The ground was opaque to every scanning technology the Coalition had deployed. Kova smelled them, the faint chemical signature of Vreth biology filtering through 14 centimeters of mineral crust, indistinguishable from the background to anything with fewer than 300 million olfactory receptors. She stopped mid-stride, turned her head 45 degrees to the left and went rigid. Her ears locked forward, her nostrils flared once, twice, and she sat down. Decker knew what that sit meant. He had seen it 1,000 times on the training ground and 41 times in the field. That sit was the most dangerous thing a Belgian Malinois could do because it was not a warning. It was a verdict. He pulled 2 Marines from the trench line and pointed at the ground where Kova was sitting. They looked at him. They looked at the dog. They dug. 18 centimeters down, they found the faceplate of a Vreth infiltrator, still burrowing, 4 meters from the command bunker's wall. The Marines handled it. When they were done, one of them looked at Kova with both stalks for a long time and then turned back to the line without speaking. Kova found 3 more before the hour was out. Each time the same, the stop, the turn, the stillness, the sit. No growl, no bark, no display. Just the calm certainty of an animal that saw no reason to be dramatic about it. The fourth one was 2 meters from the bunker, where Ansari was working on the wounded. 2 meters from a room full of Marines who couldn't fight back. Shen watched that extraction from across the trench. When it was over, his coloring shifted to the deep, even blue that Decker had seen only once before. The Vreth commander offered terms at 1400 hours: surrender the station, disarm, withdraw to the ridgeline for collection. Under Vethani military doctrine, it was acceptable when the defending force had sustained 50% casualties and lost the ability to control the engagement space. Shen's garrison had crossed both thresholds. Shen called his surviving officers into the command bunker and closed the door. Decker sat in the trench with Kova and waited. The waiting was the worst part. Not the shooting, not the mines, not the infiltrators burrowing under his feet. The waiting, because during the waiting there was nothing for Kova to do, and she dealt with it the way she dealt with every unproductive moment. She lay down next to Decker, put her chin on his boot, and watched the door of the command bunker with the patient attention of a creature that understood, on some cellular level, that decisions were being made in that room that would determine whether she and her handler lived through the day. The bioluminescent patch on her harness pulsed at 58 beats per minute. Decker counted. He had nothing else to count. The Pellic translator Ren, the senior translator, who had compiled the behavioral reference document, crouched beside Decker and spoke quietly. The proctorate is deliberating. The officers are split. Commander Shen favors the terms. Lieutenant Craig does not. Craig wants to fight. Craig says the 43rd has not stopped working. He says it is dishonorable to surrender while a member of the garrison is still actively defending the position. Ren's salamander-like eyes blinked. He means the dog, Sergeant. Decker looked at Kova. She was lying on his boot, watching the bunker door. She didn't look like she was actively defending anything. She looked like a tired dog waiting for something to happen so she could go back to work. But Craig was right. In the 4 hours since the assault began, Kova had not stopped, not once. She had worked continuously, methodically, without complaint, without fear, without any indication that she understood the scale of what was happening around her or cared about it. She had a job. She was doing her job, that was all. Ansari came out of the southern bunker, wiping her hands on a rag that had been white 4 hours ago. She sat down next to them, and Kova leaned her head against Ansari's knee without lifting her chin from Decker's boot. A contortion she managed with the boneless flexibility of a dog who had spent 6 years finding ways to touch both of her people simultaneously. "They're going to take the terms," Ansari said. "Probably. We can't, you know that." Decker did know. The Coalition's rules of engagement for human personnel in Vethani-led operations were explicit. Human soldiers did not surrender to non-signatory forces. The Vreth Compact had not signed the Coalition Accords. If Decker and Ansari surrendered, they would be classified as prisoners outside the Convention framework, which meant no repatriation, no notification, no rights. Earth's military doctrine on the subject was 2 sentences long. Do not surrender. Wait for extraction. Extraction required a functioning comm system. "I can get to the backup antenna," Decker said. Ansari looked at him. "The backup antenna is on the south tower. 200 meters outside the current perimeter, through open ground, under direct observation from the Vreth forward line." "I know. That's a one-way walk, Decker." Kova leaned against his leg. She smelled like copper dust and the faint organic sweetness of the field rations he'd been feeding her. Chicken and rice, the same brand they'd used at Fort Edril, shipped across 4 star systems because Decker had put it on the logistics request, and some clerk somewhere had shrugged and approved it. "Maybe not," he said. Shen accepted the terms at 1500 hours. His Marines began disarming, shell plate unclipped, weapons laid on the floor in the pattern the cultural brief called the Vethani concession of arms. The weapons were placed in descending order of rank. each one oriented toward the commander's position, each one silent testimony that the Marine who carried it had been found insufficient. Shen's coloring had gone to a flat, dull gray, defeat color. Every Marine in the room matched it. Decker told Shen he would not be surrendering. "You intend to fight." "I intend to reach the backup comm array. Then I intend to call for extraction." "Through 200 meters of open ground, alone." "Not alone." Both stalks angled down to Kova. She was sitting at Decker's left heel, her harness on, her lead clipped to his belt. The bioluminescent patch on her chest plate pulsed with a steady, even rhythm. Her tongue was out. She looked like she was waiting for a walk. "Sergeant Decker, the Vreth will see you within the first 30 meters. "I know. And the animal. She goes where I go." Shen's coloring flickered, dull gray to a deep, saturated indigo that spread across his entire dorsal surface in a wave that moved from head to tail like a slow tide. The Vethani standing nearest to Shen went rigid. One of them lowered its head. "That color," Ansari murmured, "that's something they do for their dead, before the body is returned to the sea." Decker looked at Shen. "I'm not dead yet, Proctorate." Shen's translator was silent for 4 seconds. Then, "No, you are not, but you are walking into it. And so is your—" He stopped. Both stalks looked at Kova. "And so is your companion." It was the first time any Vethani at Station Den had called Kova anything other than the animal, the creature, or equipment class, biological. Decker nodded once and moved to the south end of the trench. Lieutenant Craig stepped forward. He had lost a secondary arm in the fighting and was holding a field dressing over the stump with his primary. "You need suppressive fire on their eastern positions. I can give you that." Decker looked at Craig's arm. "You're wounded." "I have 3 arms remaining. The weapon requires 2. Craig's coloring shifted to the same blue-green as Shen's. "I am not doing this for you, Sergeant. I am doing it for the station. The station includes the 43rd. He meant Kova. "Covering fire from the trench wall, sustained, starting when I go over. Can you hold it?" "I can hold it until I cannot." Craig's mandibles clicked once. "That is what we do." Ansari caught his arm. "I'm coming with you." "Negative. If I don't make it, the garrison needs a medic." "If you don't make it, the garrison is a prisoner camp and I'm not covered by the convention either." She tapped the Earth flag on her shoulder. "Same doctrine, Decker." He didn't argue. There wasn't time. Just before Decker climbed the trench wall, Shen spoke one more time. "In the Vethani service, when a warrior leaves on a mission from which return is not expected, the garrison speaks the warrior's name once into the record. It is the only honor we give to the living, because the dead are honored differently." Shen's mandibles clicked twice. His coloring was the deep indigo again. "Kova," he said, not the translator. Shen himself, the word shaped by mandibles that had never been designed for Earth syllables. It came out broken, half-click, half-vowel, but it was the name. Kova looked up at the sound, ears forward. Her tail moved once. Decker climbed the wall. They went over at 1512, moving low and fast through the alkaline crust. Decker ran in a combat crouch, Kova at his left heel on a loose lead. Ansari was 3 meters to his right. The south tower was a broken column of composite and metal, leaning at 15 degrees, its base half buried in the alkaline drift. The backup antenna was a folding unit bolted to the tower's east face, 3 meters up. It had been installed as a contingency and never tested, because coalition logistics had run out of cable before they ran out of contingencies. Behind them, Craig opened up. The sound of the crew-served weapon was a deep, rhythmic thudding that shook the air. Heavy rounds, sustained fire from a Marine, who was bleeding from a wound that should have put him on the floor, and who was instead standing on the trench wall with 3 arms working a weapon designed for 4. They made it 50 meters before the first return shot. A sharp, hissing crack, a superheated round that passed close enough to ionize the air next to Decker's left ear. Craig's suppressive fire was pulling the Vreth shooters' attention. It wasn't enough to stop them from shooting, but it was enough to make them choose badly. Kova didn't break stride. She didn't flinch. She adjusted her angle by 2 degrees and kept running, her body low, her stride shortened to match his combat crouch, her ears pinned flat against her skull. They had trained for this in conditions that the K-9 school instructors had called excessive and the field operators had called Tuesday. A third shot, a fourth. The Vreth forward line had them spotted, but the shooters were at 800 meters and the wind was brutal and gusting. The rounds were close but not precise. Not yet. 50 meters, 40. Kova stopped. She stopped so abruptly that the lead jerked Decker's belt and he nearly went down. She was in the sit. Ears forward, nostrils working, eyes locked on the ground ahead. Down, Decker breathed and dropped flat. Ansari hit the dirt beside him. The ground ahead of them was seeded. Penetrators. The Vreth had mined the approach to the only backup comm array on the station. Of course they had. They had spent 2 weeks planting ordnance around Station Den with the patient thoroughness of a species that planned its wars in decades. They had identified every critical system, every fallback position, and they had planted death in the soil beneath each one. Decker lay in the copper-scented dust with rounds hissing overhead and calculated. 30 meters to the tower. Unknown number of penetrators between here and there. Each one armed, pressure-triggered, coded to detonate on anything that wasn't Vreth. No way around, the minefield probably extended wider than he could see. No way through without a detector. He had one. She was lying beside him with her tongue out. Kova such Vorin. The German command for forward search. She had heard it 6,000 times in training, on 3 different planets, in conditions ranging from a climate-controlled facility in Bavaria to a burning cargo hold on a freighter that was supposed to be carrying grain. She rose from the sit, lowered her nose to the crust, and began to move forward. Slowly, methodically, 1 step then a pause. Nose down, nostrils flaring, sampling the air and the soil in that split-second alternation that Decker thought of as listening with her face. Another step. Pause. Another step. The rounds were still coming. One hit the ground 4 meters to the right and threw grit across Kova's back. She didn't react. Another passed overhead with the sharp crack of superheated air. She didn't react. She found the first penetrator at 3 meters. Sat. Decker crawled to the spot, marked it with tape from his vest, and signaled her forward. The second at 5 meters. The third at 7. A cluster of 2 at 9 meters. She sat for each one, waited for the mark, and continued. She was mapping a path through the minefield by smell, one buried explosive at a time, while the Vreth shot at her from less than a kilometer away. Decker followed her markers, stepping where she had stepped, placing his boots in the prints her paws had left in the crust. Ansari followed him. They moved at a crawl, 3 minutes for 10 meters, 5 minutes for 20. The rounds kept coming, but Kova's path was erratic, unpredictable, following the safe ground between the buried ordnance in a weaving line that no shooter could anticipate. At 22 meters, Kova stopped. Not a sit this time. A full stop, her body rigid, 1 paw raised, weight shifted back. Decker had seen this posture exactly once before, at the advanced detection course, when the instructors had buried a cluster munition under a training lane. It meant the density ahead was too high to path through. He looked at the tower, 8 meters away, close enough to hit with a thrown stone. 8 meters of ground so packed with ordnance that a 58-pound dog with a nose that could detect parts per trillion wouldn't walk through it. Decker looked at Kova. She looked at him, calm, steady. Her tail moved once, a slow sweep through the dust. Not a wag, just a reminder that she was here, that she was his, that whatever he decided next she would accept with the same quiet trust she had accepted everything else. He unclipped her lead. "Kova Blabe. Stay," she said. She didn't like it. He could see it in the slight tension of her shoulders, the faintest tremor in her right forepaw, but she sat. Because he told her to. Because 6 years of partnership had built a contract between them that neither had ever broken. Decker stood up in the open, in full view of the Vreth line, and sprinted. He covered the 8 meters in something under 3 seconds. He didn't zig, didn't weave, didn't try to be clever. He ran in a straight line at full speed and trusted that the penetrators needed more than the fraction of a second his foot was on the ground to register and fire. 2 detonated behind him, blowing craters in the crust where his boots had been a heartbeat before. The shockwave threw him forward and he hit the base of the tower shoulder first, hard enough to crack the ceramic plate in his vest. His ears were ringing. His left hand was numb. Something warm was running down his neck. But he was at the tower. He climbed. The composite was cracked and pitted, the maintenance ladder missing 2 rungs, but 3 meters up he found the antenna bracket. The folding dish was dented, but the reflector surface was intact. The junction box opened with a quarter turn of a latch that was, for once in the history of Coalition field engineering, not seized. Decker plugged in his comm unit, powered the antenna, and waited 4 seconds for the handshake signal. Any station, this is forward station Den, Thesachroman 4. We are under assault by Vreth compact armor and infantry. Garrison has accepted terms, but 2 human personnel are not covered by non-signatory convention, requesting immediate extraction. How copy? Static wind. Then, clear as a bell through the interference, a voice that was human and calm and professionally bored in the way that military communications officers were always professionally bored. Station Den, this is Coalition Ship Ardennes, we copy your transmission. QRF is spinning up. Confirm your position and personnel count. Decker confirmed. Estimated time to extraction, 22 minutes. He climbed down. At the base of the tower, he looked out across the 30 meters of mined ground. Ansari was prone where he'd left her, her sidearm trained east. And Kova was sitting exactly where he'd told her to stay, in the middle of the minefield, 8 meters away, motionless. Her ears were forward. The bioluminescent patch pulsed steady. Her eyes were on him. A round cratered the ground 3 meters from Kova, close enough to throw dust across her paws. Kova did not move. She was waiting for him. Decker looked at the 8 meters of dense ordnance between him and his dog. He had gotten through it once by running. The penetrators had detonated behind him, which meant they had a fractional delay on the trigger. But the 2 detonations had changed the ground. The crust was broken, uneven, churned. He could see the exposed casings of more penetrators in the newly churned soil. He couldn't run through it again. "Kova," he said. His voice was even, higher, langsome. "Come here slowly." She rose. She lowered her nose. And she did what no piece of Coalition technology, no Vethani sensor array, no Vreth countermeasure system could do. She navigated the densest part of the minefield by nose, one careful step at a time, finding the safe ground between the buried ordnance with a precision that would have taken a robotic system 3 hours and a full spectral analysis suite. She did it in 40 seconds. 40 seconds during which a round hit the ground 2 meters to her right, and she didn't flinch. 40 seconds during which the Vreth shooters had a clear shot at a 58-pound target moving at a walking pace across open ground and could not hit her because she was not moving in a straight line. She was following the scent map in her head, weaving between buried ordnance, and her path was as unpredictable as the placement of the mines themselves. 40 seconds of absolute focus, absolute trust, absolute calm, the same calm that was not the absence of fear but something older and more fundamental, something bred into her bloodline over 150 centuries of partnership with a species that needed, above all things, a companion that would walk into the worst of it first and not leave. She reached him, pressed her nose into his palm, and sat down at his left heel. Her tail swept once, she sneezed. Decker picked her up. 58 pounds of dog, harness, bioluminescent patch, and accumulated Thessac dust. He put her across his shoulders in a fireman's carry and walked back along Kova's original path to where Ansari was waiting. Ansari looked at him, looked at the dog draped across his shoulders, and said nothing for 5 seconds. Then 22 minutes. 22 minutes. We should move. They made it back to the trench perimeter in 4 minutes. The Vreth infantry had begun their advance. Decker could see the segmented suits emerging from the ground in a wide arc, surfacing and reburrowing in waves. Shen met them at the trench wall. His Marines were disarmed, standing in the concession formation, but Shen himself was still in full plate, and he had not surrendered his crew-served weapon. "You reached the antenna," Shen said. "QRF is inbound, 20 minutes. We accepted terms, Sergeant. If we resist now, the terms are void." "Your terms, not mine." Decker set Kova down. She shook herself, sending a cloud of alkaline dust into the wind, and took her position at his left heel. "Proctorate, in 20 minutes, a coalition quick reaction force is going to drop into this grid and push the Vreth back to the ridgeline. Your Marines can either be standing in a surrender formation or in defensive positions ready to support the counterattack. But I'm staying in this trench, and my dog is staying with me." Shen's coloring shifted through 3 shades before settling on a deep, vivid blue-green. Not the stress color, not the defeat gray, not the morning indigo. Something new. "You ran through a minefield," Shen said. "I did. And your animal walked through it behind you." "She went first, actually." Shen's mandibles stopped. Both stalks locked on Kova. She was sitting at Decker's heel, looking up at Shen with the same soft, patient expression she gave everything. Rounds impacting, mines detonating, 7-foot crustacean warriors having a crisis of tactical doctrine. Her tongue was out. Her tail brushed the dust once. Shen said something in Vethani that the translator didn't catch. It was 2 syllables, spoken low, and every Marine within earshot went rigid. The Marines began rearming. It happened with a speed and precision that told Decker this was not improvisation. This was a formal reversal of the concession. Every weapon retrieved, every plate reclipped, every Marine back in fighting position in under 90 seconds. Shen's coloring rippled through the formation like a signal, and every Marine shifted from defeat gray to the same deep blue-green. Shen looked at Decker. 17 minutes. 17 minutes. Where do you want us? It was not a question. It was the first time a Vethani Proctorate had asked a human NCO for a tactical recommendation, and both of them knew it, and neither of them mentioned it. Craig, his stump redressed by Ansari, and his remaining arms holding a medium weapon, was already moving to position without waiting for orders. Decker put the Marines on the trench wall in a wide crescent, maximizing their overlapping fields of fire. He placed Craig's section at the eastern anchor. He put Ansari in the southern bunker with the wounded. He put himself at the center of the crescent, where the line was thinnest and the threat of subsurface infiltration was highest, with his rifle and his dog. The Vreth came. They came out of the ground and out of the flats, moving in the articulated rush of their infantry doctrine: burrow, surface, advance, burrow again. The suppressive fire from their armor column increased, pounding the trench wall with rounds that shook the ground. Kova worked. She moved along the trench line behind the Marines, nose down, finding the infiltrators burrowing under the position. Each time she sat, Decker called it and a Marine dug. She found 7 in the first 5 minutes, 4 more in the next 3, 2 more at the 11-minute mark. The Marine stopped looking at her with curiosity and started looking at her with something Decker recognized from every unit he had ever served with. It was the look soldiers gave the one who was keeping them alive. At the 12-minute mark, Kova alerted on a section of trench floor that had been quiet for the entire battle. 3 centimeters down, they hit a penetrator that had been planted weeks ago and had reached trigger depth overnight. If any Marine had stepped on that section of floor in the next 30 seconds, it would have detonated under the trench line. The blast would have collapsed the trench wall onto the command bunker's emergency exit, sealing the technical advisors and wounded inside. Shen, who had been directing fire from 20 meters away, watched the extraction. When the penetrator was cleared, he turned both stalks to Kova and held them there for 5 full seconds. She was already moving on, nose down, looking for the next one. One of the younger Marines, a lance corporal with fresh mandible scars, broke formation long enough to lower his head toward Kova as she passed. It was a gesture Decker had seen Vethani make only to their senior officers. At the 9-minute mark, a kinetic round hit the trench line 8 meters to Decker's left. The blast threw 2 Marines off their feet and sent a wall of debris across the trench. Decker went down, covering Kova with his body. When the dust cleared, he checked himself, cuts, bruises, a ringing in his left ear that was becoming permanent, and checked the dog. She was already up. She was already working. Nose down, ears forward, moving through the settling debris with the unhurried focus of an animal that had a job to do and intended to do it regardless of what the universe thought about the matter. At the 6-minute mark, the Vreth breached the east end of the trench. 3 of them came through the wall, their forward appendages armed with close-quarters weapons. Kova was between Shen and the breach. She was sitting in the trench directly in their path, looking at them with her head slightly tilted. She was not growling, not barking, not baring her teeth. She was sitting. The lead Vreth hesitated. It had fought Vethani Marines for 3 weeks, but it had never seen whatever Kova was, and something in its architecture made it stop. Kova looked at it. Brown eyes, soft, steady. No challenge. No fear. Just the calm, patient attention of a creature that had been bred for this on a world where everything was trying to kill everything else, and had learned over 10,000 years of partnership with the most dangerous species in the galaxy, that the correct response to a threat was not to flinch. The moment broke. Shen came over the trench wall and the question was closed. Quickly, quietly, and off to one side where Decker's mind declined to look too closely. Kova had not moved from her sit. Craig's section took a direct hit. 2 Marines went down. Craig didn't. He shifted position and kept shooting with the steady rhythm Decker had come to associate with Vethani discipline at its finest. The young lance corporal found one more infiltrator at the 3.5-minute mark, under his own feet. Kova sat down next to him, and he looked at her and she looked at him, and he dug without being told. 3 minutes. 2. Decker heard it before he saw it. A rising harmonic that cut through the wind and the gunfire like a blade through cloth. It was the sound of coalition dropships decelerating from orbital velocity, and it was the most beautiful sound Decker had ever heard in his life. The QRF hit the Vreth forward line at minute 1. 2 battalions in full combat drop, coming down on jets of superheated atmosphere that turned the alkaline flats into glass. The Vreth armor column reversed course. The firing stopped in increments. The armor first, then the infantry folding back underground, then the infiltrators beneath the trench line pulling back through their tunnels with a wet scraping sound Decker could feel through his boots. Kova tracked them. She stood at the trench wall with her nose pointed at the ground, her head moving slowly as the subsurface signatures faded. When the last one was gone, when the ground beneath Station Den held nothing that didn't belong there, she sneezed and sat down. The silence that followed was not real silence. The wind still howled. The wounded Marines still clicked in patterns that Ansari had learned to sort into categories: pain, confusion, request for water. But after hours of continuous combat, it felt like silence. It felt like the world had stopped breathing and was not sure it wanted to start again. Decker sat down in the trench. His legs had decided for him. He sat with his back against the wall and his rifle across his knees and his dog in his lap. Kova was too big to be a lapdog. She was 58 pounds of muscle, fur, harness, and Thessac dust, and she settled across his thighs with her chin on his forearm. She was asleep within 30 seconds. Shen found them like that. The proctorate lowered himself into the trench and sat across from Decker. His coloring had settled into the deep indigo. "I am required to write a report," Shen said. "Okay." In the report, I must explain why I reversed the concession and resumed hostilities against a superior force. You can say the QRF was inbound. I must also explain why I accepted tactical guidance from a foreign NCO who was outranked by every officer in the garrison. You can say it was a good idea. And I must explain why the single most effective detection asset on this station, an asset that identified 34 concealed penetrators and 13 subsurface infiltrators, without which the garrison would have been overrun in the first hour, is classified in the manifest as auxiliary personnel. Decker looked at Kova. She was asleep. Her paws were twitching, chasing something in a dream, probably the ball he threw for her every morning before the world went sideways. "What are you going to write?" he asked. Shen's mandibles worked. The indigo deepened. When the translator spoke, the words came slowly, as though Shen was choosing each one from a vast vocabulary and finding most of them insufficient. "I am going to write that forward station Den was held by 43 personnel, 31 Vethani Marines, 8 coalition technical advisors, 2 human soldiers," he paused, "and 1 Earth companion, who walked into the ordnance field first, who did not leave when the ground detonated beneath her, who sat in the path of an advancing enemy and did not move." Another pause longer. "And who is, in the formal assessment of this proctorate, the reason the station still stands." Decker said nothing for a long time. The wind blew. Kova slept. "She's a good dog," he said. Shen looked at Kova. Both stalks, both eyes, the full attention of a 7-foot Vethani warrior administrator, all of it focused on a 58-pound Belgian Malinois sleeping in her handler's lap with her paws twitching. "Yes," Shen said. The translator made the word flat, but Shen's coloring said everything the machine could not. "She is." Ansari walked over and sat down next to Decker. She pulled a strip of jerky from her cargo pocket, the last one, she said, and held it out. Kova opened one eye, took the jerky with the delicate precision of a creature that could have taken the whole hand and chose not to, and went back to sleep. The QRF commander, a coalition colonel named Denvas, came down from the dropship an hour later. He was Keshari, thin-limbed, membrane-filtered. He walked the perimeter, reviewed the casualty figures, and stopped when he reached Decker. The proctorate's after-action summary credits the detection asset with identifying over 40 concealed threats. He refers to it as the 43rd Defender of Station Den throughout. Not equipment, not auxiliary, the 43rd Defender. Decker looked at Shen, who was directing the evacuation of his wounded 20 meters away. The deep blue-green was still on his plates. He also recommends that all coalition forward stations in the Thessac theater be assigned Earth origin companion detection assets. He calls it a corrective to a critical capability gap in coalition sensor doctrine. He also filed a formal request for additional sleep pads and species-appropriate nutritional equipment, ceramic, hand-formed, bearing the station insignia. Filed under critical logistics. Decker scratched behind Kova's ear. She sighed in her sleep. "The proctorate takes logistics seriously," he said. "The debrief took 11 days. Coalition Command sent a review board that included a Vethani admiral, 2 human colonels, and a xenobiologist who spent 3 hours observing Kova, and wrote a report that Ansari summarized as a lot of numbers and one sentence in bold that said the dog's nose was more accurate than any sensor in the coalition inventory. 3 things happened in the weeks that followed. First, Auxiliary Unit K-94 was reclassified to Companion Combat Asset, Deathworld Origin, Class 1. The designation came with its own logistics code and a medical priority rating that placed Kova's veterinary care at the same level as a wounded Marine's. Second, the Vethani military issued a doctrinal memorandum titled On the Recognition of Apex Companion Species. It was 14 pages long. Page 6 contained a passage that Ansari translated with difficulty, because the Vethani language did not have a word for pet, and had been forced to construct one. The constructed word translated, roughly, as the small one who walks into danger first and does not leave. The memorandum was distributed to every Vethani military unit in the coalition theater. Decker heard later that the document had been read aloud at a Vethani Naval Command briefing, and that the admiral who read it had gone to the deep blue-green color by the time she finished page 6, and that every officer in the room had matched her. Third, Craig survived. Ansari saved the arm through a 14-hour surgery combining human field medicine with Vethani regenerative protocols. When Craig came out of sedation, the first thing he asked was whether the 43rd was unharmed. Ansari told him the dog was fine. Craig's coloring went to deep blue-green and he went back to sleep. Fourth, and this was the one Decker carried with him, a crate arrived at his quarters 3 weeks after the battle. Vethani manufacture, sealed with the Proctorate's personal sigil. Inside was a sleep pad, the correct size for a 58-pound dog, and a ceramic bowl, hand-formed, glazed in the deep blue-green that Decker now understood was not stress and not defeat and not mourning. It was the color the Vethani used for what they honored. There was no note, there didn't need to be. Decker put the pad in the corner of his quarters and the bowl next to his bunk. Kova inspected both, circled the pad twice, and settled onto it with a sigh that said she had been waiting for everyone to figure this out. Outside, the wind on Thessalroman 4 blew copper dust across the flats, and the repaired antenna on the south tower caught the light of a rust-colored sunset, and the station was quiet. Kova's tail swept the pad once left to right, her eyes closed. Decker sat on his bunk and watched her breathe, and did not think about anything at all for a very long time.